I'm ready.
And I think we are live.
Okay, hello there. Hello, welcome everybody to the Society of Music Analysis Study Day. This is the end of a very long but very exciting day, and this is our roundtable discussion. I'm here with five very important people. That doesn't include myself, I'm the sixth. And I'm going to introduce everybody, I think, if that's okay, and ask each of our guests, before we start a discussion, I'll ask each of our guests just to say a little bit about themselves, about their interest in this really important topic, which has never been as timely as it is now, teaching music theory in the digital age. I should say before I start that I'm Kenneth Smith. For sins I must have committed when I'm small, I'm the president of the Society for Music Analysis, which is a UK-based charity devoted to all things music analytical and music theoretical too. I'll maybe say a little bit more about that at the end, but let's get on with what we're here for. So I'll start off by introducing our first speaker, first guest, participant, 12 Tone, also known as Cory Arnold, or do we say Cory Arnold, also known as 12 Tone?
Whichever one works.
Whichever works. Well, whichever one puts you at the top of the alphabetical.
I'll respond to whatever name. But yeah, no, as Ken said, my name is Cory. I make 12 Tone. I've been doing videos about music theory on YouTube for close to 6 years now. It's sort of a top-down, hand-drawn animation style. I do song analyses of popular songs, and then I sort of use those to trick people into watching my videos about much more esoteric theory concepts. And that's my whole content strategy.
Well, that's very sneaky, if you don't mind me saying so, but it's one I can applaud. So that's great. Thanks ever so much, Cory. We also have Julianne Grasso. Julianne's a visiting assistant professor of music theory at University of Texas at Austin. Graduated in 2020 with a PhD from University of Chicago with a dissertation on video game music. Her interests include music and media, music cognition, public music theory, and the most important of all on my list, which is pizza. So, Julianne.
I know, if you compare the bios of everybody in this roundtable, everyone was really serious except mine. So thanks for that introduction. My interest in this topic probably came from with my interest in video games and stuff. I was always sort of looking online and engaging with those fandom communities and getting into how fans are interested in music theory and the kinds of videos they're watching. And then in 2019, I made a talk at the Society for Music Theory conference that used the term amateur music theorists to talk about YouTubers. And I didn't mean it in a pejorative way, but this kind of went on Twitter and sort of spread a little bit. And there was a kind of kerfuffle, which we could perhaps talk about later, but it really kind of highlighted some of the frictions between these communities. And so I've been interested in thinking about different music theory communities, different discourses.
Great. Thanks. Really nice to. Well, I've never met before until today, so really nice to meet you, Julianne. So next on my list then is John Moore. John's a PhD candidate funded by the School of the Arts at the University of Liverpool, which is one of the top universities in the world. I'm not sure how official that ranking is. He obtained his B.Mus from the Queen's University of Belfast and went on to work as a head of music at St John Talbot's Academy in Shropshire. John's MA thesis was on negative harmony, as well as looking at music theory, digital ecosystems more generally. And building on this, John's PhD research focuses on music theory, communities and discourses in online spaces with a particular focus on YouTube. There's something that's not in John's biography, which I'll slip in there, which is that he's been doing quite a bit of teaching in the University of Liverpool, and the students on a recent module evaluation described him as a god. Now, I don't know how true that is, but the best I've ever been called on my student evaluations is a human. So you must be doing something right, John. So over to you, John.
Yeah, well, you kind of said it all there. It's kind of quite a strange place to be for me because, I mean, my PhD is essentially about Adam and Cory. So it's kind of really strange to be on a live stream. So basically what I have done is I have organized, you know, an international conference, is essentially just to be in front of you. That's yeah. So I mean, as kind of said, I started off getting interested in negative harmony, just, well, not in negative harmony in itself, but it's sort of the phenomenon that sort of emerged around it. And yeah, I was just bitten by the kind of YouTube music theory bug, and I've just been fascinated ever since. And that's really what my research is all about.
Great, thanks, John. And he's a god part-time, you know, moonlighting as a god. Adam Neely then, yeah, nice to meet you. Adam is a bassist, a composer and a YouTuber with an engaged subscriber base of over 1 million people. Composer, YouTube celebrity. Graduated from Berkeley with a BA in jazz composition in 2009 and graduated with a master's in jazz composition from the Manhattan School of Music in 2012. Really nice to meet you, Adam. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Sure, yeah. Well, yeah, I have a YouTube channel like Cory does. Similar focus. The way I say is I explore what music means and what it means to be a musician. So it's not specifically music theory based, although I feel like a lot of people on music theory YouTube don't do just music theory. There's also music composition and musical performance and musicology and music cognition. And it's this much more fluid space, which I think is very exciting. I've been making YouTube videos for 15 years now. I've been making YouTube videos since the very beginning of YouTube. I've only been doing it professionally, meaning my main day gig, for 5 or 6 years now. But yeah, that's it's very exciting to see how much it's grown. I did not know that it would become this thing when I started. I'm very grateful for the opportunity to be here and talk with you all. And yeah, and I wish I made a silly bio too, but I like
We can have time at the end of the whole discussion for little bio supplements. So you can try and slip something in there. Great. Now, Lisa, so last final participant, William O'Hara. So William's an assistant professor of music at Gettysburg College with a PhD from Harvard University and has previously taught at Tufts University. Like Julianne, is interested in video games and the intellectual history of music theory. His article on the cultural politics of music analysis in the online popular press won the 2020 Adam Crims Award for the Society of Music Theory's Popular Music Interest Group. He's also, there is something here that's definitely comical. He's an Arsenal supporter. I know nothing about football. I live in Liverpool. I didn't realize there was 2 teams. I thought the blue was just the away strip for the red team, whatever that is. But I'm glad to realize that. Well, I've actually we've painted our house in a red brick tourist blue, and we've had eggs thrown at the windows and all sorts. Just because of that. But really nice to meet you, Will. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about your interest in the topic?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, including that in my bio is my way of saying take it easy on me. I've been through a lot. So yeah, I mean that sort of covers it a bit. Like Julianne, you know, working as one of my scholarly interests being centered on video game music, a lot of that floats around YouTube and other forms of online media. I fell into writing about it a little bit by accident. That article that you mentioned was a response to a call for papers about music analysis and politics, and I sort of, you know, had been reading a lot of these articles over recent years, and it kind of clicked that, oh, I might have something to say about this, and I might have something to say about sort of the discourse and the way that it, you know, does and doesn't line up with typical academic discourse in interesting ways that it follows, in some ways that it diverges. And it sort of went from there. I also gave a paper on a slightly different project on that same panel with Julianne about arrangement on YouTube, essentially the ways that musicians on YouTube, you know, are using music theory and music analysis to, you know, create really interesting arrangements, the sort of one-man band kind of, or one-woman band arrangements that you see betray a really deep understanding of song structure and of harmony and things like that. And so I've been doing some research kind of reverse engineering that a bit, seeing, you know, what you can think about how people are analyzing these songs in order to do live looping performances or, you know, solo sort of multi-track performances and things like that. So that's sort of my interest in this area.
Great stuff. Thanks, Will, and thanks to all of our guests today. So, folks who are watching on YouTube, please do feel free to add any questions that you want to the chat function or whatever the comments are on YouTube. And then we've got secret spies who are filtering me those questions, so I'll get to answer some of those. In the absence of any questions immediately, I've got a few that I can maybe start to just kickstart some discussion. I just picking up on something Will just said there about people, students, in the broader sense of the word, students using music theory. My simple question with maybe complicated answers is music theory something that we use, or can it be a creative endeavor in itself?
I mean, I think it can be both. I think that music theory has a lot of utility, but one of the founding principles of my work that I've said this a couple times in different settings is that the thoughtful, thorough analysis of art is itself art. And so I view my work as primarily artistic. And I view like the stuff that Adam is doing, or at least the way I'm consuming it, as being artistic. But on the other hand, it's certainly true that like if you learn like certain analytical models for harmony, you can then use those ideas to write chord progressions that will sound good for the culture those analytical models were developed for, and same with rhythms and whatnot. So I think there's a lot of utility to music theory. I tend to get a little bit antsy when people are presenting it as only utilitarian.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I feel like this is a place where our channels diverge a little bit, because I do think of the analysis itself as like an artistic thing. A YouTube video can be an incredibly artistic thing with research and etc. And it runs parallel to academic research in a different way, presentation way. But I also think of it like, journalism. Pieces of journalism can be art, but they can also describe the world in a really meaningful way. I think that's whenever you're dealing with any kind of online media, making the parallel to journalism is, I think, an important one to make, because it puts it, at least for what I do on YouTube, it puts, I think, a lot of what I do in that light. It's easier to understand it that way rather than thinking of it purely as teaching or purely as art or purely as a utilitarian thing, but that's where I'm coming from with it right now. That's kind of what my current thinking is.
Will?
Yeah, I agree with all that. I would say that music theory is itself, something that's always in motion. That doing music theory is also adding to music theory and creating new theory. It's not just an inert thing that all right, it's all done, this is what the theory is, and we just apply it. Just any sort of application is almost by nature pushing music theory forward. That's the whole academic endeavor, whether it's unfolding in universities or on YouTube. That it's a sort of creative additive thing that you can shape it and make it your own. And I think all of us here are want to help more people learn to to use it and make it both.
Julianne, any thoughts?
Yes. Well, I mean, I agree with everybody for sure. I think that the sort of dichotomy between like a utilitarian use of music theory and like the creative or artful use is maybe not an entirely false dichotomy. It's certainly useful to conceptualize music theory in these different veins, but I think that it can be kind of everything. The purpose, having a purpose doesn't kind of bring it away. Oh, sorry. Yeah, my internet is not super good.
You're back on.
I was saying, okay. Right. Sorry about that. I was just saying that utilitarian, the sort of utilitarian use of music theory can be itself artfully thought about. And I think that this is it's almost a non-answer to this question, but I think it's useful to consider these overlaps and sort of what everyone's, and Adam was saying too, of just like not just thinking in terms of like purpose versus art, not sort of having them be opposed.
John, any thoughts?
Yeah, not a huge amount to add. I agree with most of what was said there. I suppose I'm just going to come out and say that the sort of YouTube as a platform and what Cory and Adam are sort of adding to that, as well as a host of others, I suppose, is kind of reframing this question and sort of, you know, and kind of, I don't know, it's the kind of content that they're putting out is, I can't get my thoughts together quite well enough. I mean, I don't think we would be asking this question if the likes of Adam and Cory didn't exist, is what I'm saying. You know, it's not something which probably comes up in academic circles enough. Whereas this kind of new music theory, if we want to call it that, and this kind of democratization of music theory as a result of YouTube and other online platforms is probably moving us into these more creative directions and causing us to kind of maybe reevaluate our practice.
Well, what's interesting, because I don't come from an academic music theory background, but I come from a jazz background, and I'm theory in jazz is always for the benefit of the improviser and the performer and the composer. And I like talking about theory, and I like understanding music from that analytical perspective. But at least in jazz, it's always a means of talking about the actual performance, all of that. So that's kind of like the ethos that I always came into making YouTube videos. This is a thing, you can make music with it, and this is cool. But then it started to morph in a different direction just over time, based on what my interests are, like my personal interests. There wasn't any like specific path to the whole thing. But the lines are blurred, like I was saying earlier, the lines are blurred between everything, at least in the YouTube music theory discourse, whatever that is. I think it's a good thing. I think it's nice that they're blurred, because delineating the two, I don't think is useful. But maybe it is. I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah. I think that's probably also. Or sorry, go ahead.
No, Cory.
Well, I was going to say, I think that's also something that's kind of inevitable to YouTube as a platform, because fundamentally, like, if we want to be doing this at like a professional level, like Adam and I are, if we want to have a large enough audience for this to be our job, we have to draw in not just academics, but also a general audience.
Yeah.
And that, you know, we try and do our best to like still have the sort of academic rigor to it, but there is a level to that requires a sort of aesthetic credibility, a way of sort of presenting ourselves as qualified. And that, I think, tends to push us not necessarily towards like entertainment, but like towards that like mass appeal thing that winds up looking more like art.
Right. You use the term, and I know this term is used, curiosity content.
Yes.
Which is, I think, a good way of describing it, because edutainment is the pejorative, but I think it's a great way of framing it as pieces of media that get people curious, and that has a different value from pieces of media that educate, or it's a very different thing, because they might overlap, but the ultimate purpose is aesthetic rather than informational, I think. I mean, that's definitely how I'm approaching it.
Yeah, I think a lot of my work sort of frames around the idea of like, here's a really cool thing. You can go learn more about it if you want.
100%.
And I've given you sort of the groundwork to go do that research. But like, if you watch a 15-minute video about like cube dance, you're not going to walk away with a complete understanding of cube dance.
No.
It's just, I don't have time.
Yeah.
Just as you were talking there, I was just wondering about some of the differences between the US and the UK, maybe. I mean, in the US, one of the things I've always liked is the term music theory covers so much. It covers analysis, all aspects of theory. Whereas in the UK, and it might not be the same, in the most recent years, maybe I'm just thinking a little bit in the past, but there's always been a sort of clear but slightly strange separation between music theory, which mostly younger people who were learning instruments when they're kids will think of as something that they have to learn to pass exams. It's something as an adjunct to learning an instrument. It's something that they don't really know exactly why they need to do. Often, as a result, don't necessarily want to do it. Whereas analysis is something which tends to be associated with what you do at school when you write Roman numerals under a piece of music. And I think those are, we're breaking down those stereotypes massively, I'm sure, in the UK. But there is still this kind of lingering separation. I think even when students come to university, they have this kind of in their minds. And one of you earlier on used the term exploring. I think it was Adam, you know, and that's actually what I've started calling some of my modules, exploring music, because I think that actually encapsulates a lot more about what we're trying to do, which seems to happen under the US music theory term, which I'm not sure really happens necessarily in the UK so much.
I mean, there's still, like, in the US, an association, at least in my experience, between like analysis and just putting Roman numerals on things. And this is something like I've tried to push back on in my work, and I've argued that like Roman numeral analysis, it's not really analysis, it's labeling. It's the first step of an analysis. But I think that a lot of, at least like undergrad theory, still very much focuses on like, these are the names of these things, and now you're done.
Yeah, absolutely. I also think there's something in what Will said a little bit earlier on about you know, music theory being constantly changing and evolving, and everybody having a role in that. It's not just for academics to you know, make small tweaks. You know, we can all make changes, and I think that's one of the things that we try to sort of inculcate in students, that music theory is kind of just that. It's theory. You know, it might all be wrong. I'm sure it's not, but it might be to some degree, and that's something that I think people do tend to forget.
There's the term theory. My thoughts on this are constantly changing, but I always was assuming that it meant the craft, like the craft of performance, or the craft of composition, or the craft of something like that. But it's definitely not that. There can be a lot more meaning to the word theory, but that was always how I perceived it. And generally speaking, that's kind of what I end up doing in videos, is treating theory as part of a very practical craft of doing something. That said, I mean, that's maybe, I guess, the jazz background, because you need to know the Roman numerals in order to play the music. There's such like an overlap. It's just there's just no ability to perform. There's no ability to do the craft unless you have a deeper, or at least that understanding, being able to label things, doing that first step of analysis. You don't necessarily need to go beyond that, but that first step of analysis, it has been a big part of how I look at music on the YouTube channel. Is these are the labels for things. This is the feeling that's associated with it that I feel, and this is how you might use it in improvisation, and this is how you might think about it in all these other different ways.
Folks, here's another question then. The participatory culture, particularly of, you know, YouTube, or I say YouTube, generally online spaces. It's a kind of a democratization, we might call it, of the discipline. It's often called. To my mind, that's a really good thing. Is it a good thing? Are there problems with it? What do people think?
I mean, it's both. Yeah, it's both. There was a thing that came up about authority or an earlier session, and it's an interesting one, because you notice that a lot of people in the YouTube music theory space, there is a wide variety of backgrounds, but everybody is also very, honestly, I can't point to anybody in particular who would be like, oh, you're spreading misinformation. Maybe there might be a video here and there that might not be the full picture. Maybe it might not be great for everybody's, everybody's educational purpose if you're using it in a classroom or whatever. Like, maybe certain things are not great because of how they're formatted for the curiosity content aspect of how a YouTube video works. But everybody feels like, at least, I don't want to speak in generalizations, but it seems like a lot of people know what they're doing. And I think the cream rises to the top in a lot of ways, because if the editorial process on YouTube is kind of non-existent, but it kind of is existent, because people will let you know if you're wrong, and in droves. And it's pretty like, I've occasionally issued corrections. I know Cory has issued correction videos. There's no actual reason to, except for the deep feeling of wanting to present information well because of the social pressure, really. At least for me.
Clicks.
And the clicks, yeah, honestly.
Yeah, you get clicks.
You get clicks if you're right, I guess.
Just to kind of echo that as well. I mean, the point came up earlier in the day about YouTube videos not being peer reviewed, and sort of whenever Kenneth and I were sort of having a chat, there's an argument that your peer review is a lot more strict, I suppose, in a sense, like, and peer review in academic circles, if you don't pass it, you don't get your article out. If you guys put something out wrong, you'll get a lot of people in comments telling you to go and die.
Yeah. Well, I mean, academic peer review is like free people. I mean, the number of times I've heard the term peer review lately by all sorts of people, it's always about the vaccines, whether or not they're being peer reviewed. And I'm thinking about, academic peer review in the humanities. It's like 3 or 4 people read an article or a book, express opinions on it, and it's totally anonymous. It's accepted or it's not. Whereas people who are putting stuff onto YouTube, out of their own time, their own free will, you can be, you've really got the public opinion as your just huge peer review. And people, there are know-it-alls who will very quickly correct you.
Well, I mean, the thing is, we'll definitely get a lot of corrections really quickly if we're wrong in the comment section. But the thing is, we don't have to read the comment section. Like, that's not a requirement of the job. And I think that as creators get big, a lot of creators stop because it just is not actually a particularly high value way to get feedback. And what I've done, for instance, is I get a lot more of my feedback on Twitter and Discord, which are smaller communities, or my followings are anyway. And so I'll get more dedicated people responding. And also, especially on Twitter, I have a lot of music academics who follow me, people with PhDs in this stuff, people who are professors. And I'm much more concerned if they tell me I screwed up, right? If I post a video and Julianne messages me and they're like, you did this wrong, I'm going to be like, wait, what did I do? How do I fix this?
That has not happened, by the way. I promise.
But if it did, I would, partly because it hasn't happened, I would take it seriously.
Well, I'll jump in with one maybe circuitous point. I think, to go back to the original question, that on balance, democratizing music theory is a very, very good thing. And I'm all in favor of hearing more of it. What I actually would say, though, is I want to circle back to one of the little talking points that you had pre-circulated, one of the concepts that might be used. I sort of love the phrase, a little theory is a dangerous thing, or it was enough theory to be dangerous, or something like that, which I want on a bumper sticker. Now, but I mean, one of the things that struck me when I was starting to write about this was music theory in print. This is like Slate and Vox and all the explainers and stuff. And music theory sometimes lends itself to that sense of authority because it is a massive academic discipline that tends, in all of its spheres, it tends to have a lot of authority within music schools and within sort of academic circles. Theory is often seen as kind of forbidding and formal, and it is possible to fall into wielding that in a negative way. Not to say that that people shouldn't be experimenting with what music theory can teach them, but it's very possible to fall into, this is why this is good, and I'm going to stake out my own aesthetic positions because music theory supports me, and that is unassailable. And part of I think the academic process and the process that a lot of us go through is that theory is always assailable, but that might not be obvious to YouTube viewer or something like that. That actually part of the process is peer review in all of its forms. But theory, I don't know that I'd say theory in particular lends itself to this, but the air of academic expertise lends itself to, I'm right, you're wrong, this is good or this is bad.
I mean, sorry. Julian. No, you go first. I've been talking a lot.
No, I think I think all of these are bringing up issues of inclusion and accessibility as well. And, thinking of the participatory culture of YouTube and the sense of authority and the sense of saying, oh, this secret Christmas chord or whatever is, proves this genius and this kind of thing, often really upholds, often upholds, white supremacy, misogyny, all the isms, that are very, very entrenched in music theory, so entrenched that we often don't see them. I mean, this panel right now, I'm making assumptions, but we do all look white, and whiteness is a huge part of what has made music theory what it is. So, and to go back to the questions of like, what's right, what's wrong, is the first step of music theory to label, and is there no other step beyond that? That's when we can start to think about, maybe let's break this down. Like, where did this music theory come from? Where did these labels come from? And how can we include more diverse voices in this culture of participation and have it not just be the typical music theory people like us?
Yeah, very, very good questions, Julianne. I was going to ask a subsidiary question, but I wonder if other people have thoughts on that.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, Cory.
Go ahead. You made a whole 45-minute video. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah,
I got to interview with Phil Ewell, who's amazing human being, and it got really got my wheels turning. I'm glad that a lot of this stuff has come up. Yeah, music theory on YouTube reflects a lot of the music theory, the same problems in music theory elsewhere, is that it's predominantly white, predominantly male for the most part, although it is, there are some, I don't want to sugarcoat it at all. So yeah, it's predominantly white, predominantly male, and a big responsibility, at least for people like me who have a platform, is to try and figure out ways of making it not that. And the idea of using music theory as a cudgel, of using music theory as an authoritative voice, is something that I'm acutely aware of whenever I write a script. It's like, this is the thing. I've started to write a lot more. This is how I feel. I'm not sure about you. That kind of language in the stuff, making it much more about my own personal experience and not trying to prescribe anything to anybody in particular. These are conscious choices that I'm trying to start implementing. But in the past, I have said different kinds of language I've used, mainly just because I've become a lot more aware of what music theory has represented to people in the broad culture, which is what Will was saying. I love the secret decoder ring paper, the idea of in a lot of these think pieces, it's used as the secret code. And this is what the geniuses knew, this one hidden piece of information. And I don't want to cast too much shade, but it's kind of like the Malcolm Gladwellification of a lot of understanding in music, basically everything, but in music in particular. I will say that music theory on YouTube generally recently has not fallen into that trap, which I'm very glad that that's been the case. The one possible exception is Andrew Wong made a video talking about the note. He was making a video about the supertonic and how it's all. Yeah. And that's probably the closest I've seen recently, but it's a good video. And Andrew Wong's a great pop producer. So I give him all the passes in the world because he's actually using music.
And even there, I think he's describing a pattern more than saying this is the thing you have to do to sound pop. He's saying this does seem to keep happening in pop.
Yeah. But I was just trying to look for contemporary examples of that. And that video is probably the only one, with some exceptions, that kind of falls into that. But yeah.
I think there are aspects, again, to come back to YouTube as a platform that exacerbates some of these issues, because again, we're trying to appeal to a general audience, and there's a lot of people who watch my videos, and who watch especially the song analysis videos, where really all they're looking for is someone to tell them that a song they already like is good, but in a way that sounds authoritative, in a way that they can use to prove to other people who say it's not good, that they have better taste because I said the thing was good and I know words like tritone substitution and cube dance. So there's a lot of it to that. And there's also, in terms of sort of representation, YouTube in general has a lot of issues with that. If you look at the top science YouTube creators, they're all white. And if you look at the top music theory YouTube creators, we're mostly white. There's PBS Soundfield, Nare Soul, but it's mostly white people talking about music, because for a lot of reasons, there's a lot of cultural reasons that we wind up in those positions, but there's also, specific to YouTube, the audience reaction. YouTube isn't great at promoting non-white voices. And this has been a thing for a long time, and non-male voices as well. And non-straight voices, non a lot of things voices. YouTube isn't great at that. And
Oh, sorry to jump in.
No, go ahead.
I want to emphasize the fact that a lot of this is algorithmic. So the problems that we're facing for diversity, and problems that we're facing with representation, are far beyond what an individual person can realistically do. because the algorithm, and there's some great papers about it, but the algorithm generally reinforces social predisposed social hierarchies, and that's very, very unfortunate, because there's a moment where things can change, and it's now where we can try and change the faces to better reflect many cultures and many communities, but the algorithm itself is constantly reinforcing whiteness and maleness. So those are some of the problems definitely on the platform that are unique to the fact that it's a digital world versus academia, which has its own issues for sure, but it's not algorithmically based.
Yeah, I mean, thinking about academia, diversity is a major concern in the moment, but it certainly has for a while, and it's not just academia, of course. It's any institution. In music theory as a discipline, we're wrestling with the legacy of the past. We're asking questions of our current practice. And I mean, I think it's fair to say there's differences of opinion about the best way forward for that. Focusing on the aspect of inclusion as a sort of part of diversity. I mean, there's there's going to be political disagreements, but I think we can all agree that we want our discipline to be as open and welcoming as we possibly can. I mean, no one wants to appeal to a very narrow demographic. Thinking like in an institution, it behooves the institution to monitor that, to ask questions of itself, and there's a kind of collective responsibility from the entire top to the bottom of an institution of all participants to think about diversity. Whereas I guess for a lot of us in universities, a lot of the problems have been caused outside of the university in any case, but in practice, in society, and the internet is remarkably cruel for exacerbating and reinforcing stereotypes. I mean, look, I've been watching, you're all American, you probably know Murder, She Wrote, the really bad, I've been watching episodes of that. I don't mind going on record and saying it. And he's been advertising plans for me all the last 3 weeks. They obviously think I'm going back, back in time, and I must be near the end. So yeah, it just reinforces so many prejudices. 12 Tone and Adam, you're both, extremely conscious of this, as you've just shown us. Is there are there things that we can do?
I mean, watch and support non-white, non-male creators is sort of the big thing. But again, like Adam was saying, a lot of this is algorithmic. So I would love to be doing more of that. So honestly, if anyone watching this isn't a cishet white man and makes YouTube videos about music, let me know. I would love to check that out. But because the algorithm doesn't surface these things as much, I don't even know very many things that I could recommend. Like I can, again, like PBS Soundfield, Anuja Kamat is another good one, although she's not really uploading anymore. But there's just not that many names that I know. And I would love to know, so yeah.
I guess, is it a problem of a kind of a flat hierarchy where there's no sort of individual responsible? It's just this kind of cruel algorithm.
Yes, 100%.
There are individuals who could change the algorithm.
Yeah, and they are employed by Google. So, but it's a cruel system, because the algorithm reinforces what people are led to believe that they want, and it's this cyclical thing, because then they keep consuming the same kinds of voices like me, cishet white male. And I can think of things that I personally can do better, which is feature people not like me as much as I can, and try and promote people as much as I can. But at the same time, the YouTube algorithm, I cannot stress this enough. It really governs everything on the platform. It governs like what people watch, because people aren't finding videos purely by searching combination tones in the music of Phil Niblock or whatever. They might just be just watching random videos, and then one of my videos comes up and like, oh, what's this? And then I have a video talking about Marianne Emache and her autoacoustic music and a lot of that stuff. And they discover it, and then they discover me talking about it. That algorithm was what led them there. It wasn't anything systemic outside of this one thing. I mean, like, you should really hear how YouTubers talk about the algorithm. It's almost in this quasi like religious thing. Like, what does the algorithm want? It's this like I'm trying to appease this thing. It's
like show you all their analytics and look, I have this CTR at this level and this much watch time, and like, why is this only being 6 out of 10? Why are that? It's just like, oh
it's pretty interesting. It's intriguing what our quasi-religious relationship is to this. I keep using the word religious. I probably shouldn't, but that's what
you're not wrong.
You're not wrong. Julianne.
Sorry, yeah, I was going to say what's infuriating about academia is that we don't have this algorithm. We don't have this evil deity, and yet we are, especially in music theory, so much perpetuating so many of the same kinds of issues that we are trying to work on. And stuff like this study day, we had quite a bit of presentations on accessibility, on open access kind of things, and of helping everyone kind of get on the board of more accessible kind of content and music theory in academia. And yet it's still, who are the professors, who are the senior professors versus the junior professors versus adjunct professors, those who have job security versus those who don't have job security. It looks like the algorithm's in play here as well. But we're supposed to be, we presume to be, this more democratic, like free thoughts, free thinking kind of large institution of institutions, and it's absolutely not. So it's sort of infuriating that students are going to YouTube to get more accessible content, and that we can't provide it to them.
Yeah, it's relatedly, like I've been asked a couple times, and I think about YouTube as a replacement for the classroom. And Adam is shaking his head. I completely agree. I don't think YouTube can serve, like, please do not use my videos as a replacement for like getting a music degree if you want a music degree. Like, they're not going to be, again, because I can't provide as much detail and I can't sort of build a lesson plan across time because I have to get you to click each individual video. And so like I think in a lot of ways what Adam and I do and what most music theory YouTubers do is a quasi rebellion against sort of academic standards, but we're also still very reliant on the academy doing what they do. And it would be really nice if they did it better.
I agree. I definitely have that. Like can I swear on this right now?
I'll just make a caveat that if any of our younger viewers are under 18, they might want to cover their ears.
Okay. All right, 5, 4.
Don't repeat this in front of your friends.
I have been known to be a bit of a shit stirrer on, and that's a big, like, I like that a lot. But I don't ever think that what I do is in any way, shape, or form a replacement for people learning how to play music from other people. What I do is I've begun to thought like science communication is huge, and there's a long history of science communication where you have established professionals in science communicating complicated ideas in a way that people can understand without dumbing them down too much, or at least trying to impart the general meaning of what quantum physics is. I don't know much about quantum physics, but I could probably like talk about what quantum entanglement might mean for people. I don't know how I learned that, but I've watched enough Michio Kaku and these great scientists who are great communicators. And music doesn't have that. Music theory doesn't really have that long of a tradition in the sense, maybe Leonard Bernstein, but the way that you have people communicating to a mass audience, these subjects that get them generally interested in the field of music theory. That would, I feel like, what my role might be, versus education in the sense of like, all right, now that you're interested, let's actually learn this thing. You can't do that from YouTube. It's not designed for that sort of thing, or at least what I do. Yeah,
very much a gateway more than a destination.
the thing I'm eternally grateful to is, as I was saying before when we were just chatting privately to you guys, is how attractive you've made our theory courses at universities. We're getting students who actually have a real thirst and a real energy for this stuff. You know, and of course we have to provide a, you know, well, we want to provide a full curriculum. So, you know, making short videos isn't what we can do. You know, we have to, students are paying you know, exorbitant fees in the UK, certainly for, you know, for full lectures. But I'm just, you know, just thinking about how we, you know, how our other academics here, you know, teaching theory courses, how you use online resources, or how you see this whole world in terms of collaboration and, you know, ways forward. Will, and then Julian, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, so I guess a couple of things come to mind. I mean, that, you know, just to echo that there is obviously huge, you know, desire out there for content about music, you know, whether that's, you know, explaining songs or explaining concepts and sort of clarifying, here's some interesting thing that you might not know about. There's obviously a huge audience out there for it that seems to be better served than maybe it has been in recent years. But, you know, it's the same phenomenon with the journalism and YouTube. And yeah, driving the conversation into our classrooms. I mean, I frequently have students who have maybe gotten the 5 to 10 minute introduction from a 12-tone video or something like that. They already know when I bring up Neo-Riemannian theory with sophomores, like they know a little bit because they've gotten, you know, they've you know, heard this, or I hear about the latest Adam Neely video, like what it was about, or when you mentioned one of my papers once, you know, I hear about it, you know, before I even get a chance to see YouTube. I hear, oh, Adam Neely just mentioned you, like it's a huge influence, and it can be really nice to build out conversations that you might not have, whether it's on a really current topic or an esoteric topic. You can get a student asking you, oh, you know, I heard somebody on YouTube talking about this thing, and it reminds me a little bit of what we talked about in class. Is that, you know, is that relevant? And, you know, it opens the opportunity to lead that student down to like, yeah, this is a concept that we don't often talk about in undergraduate classes, but it has this whole history, and now they have a little way into that. You know, one of the things I always think about music theory is that in classrooms, we have never been good enough at showing students sort of behind the curtain, that sort of how theory is made, or the fact that these concepts have histories, or that, you know, real, you know, academic music theorists, the people who are teaching this, we don't sit in our offices all day writing Roman numerals under things. Like, we don't always do a good enough job of conveying to our students that there's a lot more to theory, a lot more different topics and systems, and a lot more depth. And I think that one of the big effects that I see over the past couple of years is students getting an appetite for that depth, or realizing that they, you know, there is so much more to music theory, and now feeling empowered to ask about it and to pursue it, and to, you know, connect with their professors on another level, you know, connect with these advanced concepts.
Yeah, I mean, that's, if I can jump in, that's kind of exactly my experience, and this is exactly how I use, you know, your guys' videos, and as well as some other creators, particularly whenever I was teaching before higher education. I was a school teacher for a while, and I used to kind of on a Friday with my GCSE class, so that's like 15, 16. I used to just kind of select one of your videos at random, which was probably a little bit, you know, a little bit over their head, but it was there. But as you were kind of saying, it was just enough to get them interested. There was just enough there for their minds to be blown. I don't know, something like, I don't know, Adam's video on musical fractals, for example, and, or, you know, and again, for kind of older students as well, the Neo-Riemannian stuff and so on. And there's just enough there to get them, you know, really kind of excited about this. And you do it in such a way that maybe we are maybe incapable, or perhaps unwilling to do with as much enthusiasm and kind of polished finesse, will we say. And it can just be the perfect opener. And yeah, and again, a very similar experience as well, both in high school and in higher education as well, with students coming to me asking me about something they've seen in a 12-tone video, or something they've seen with Adam Neely, and they just completely freaked out whenever I told them that I was doing this. So yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah. Oh,
Julianne.
Sorry. I'm always interrupting somebody. I'm so sorry.
Do. It's my feeling as a chair if you have to interrupt, so carry on.
Sorry. I was just gonna, agree with what Bill and John were saying, and how students are coming to me and being like, did you see this video? Do you agree, disagree, and stuff like that. And I've also assigned supplementarily like 12 tones videos for like a particular concept. I think, and different YouTubers have different styles and different ways of portraying theoretical concepts using visual metaphors, drawings, or something like that, and or just the way that the script kind of goes across, or the animations, things like this that can be really, really useful to help different types of students understand these concepts. Specifically, like me, I'm sort of tethered to my piano. I understand music from a very piano epistemology kind of thing, and a lot of YouTubers are actually more like guitarists. And even though I have a guitar, I don't play it very well or at all. So
you can see a violin in my background there as well, exactly the same. I never touched
Here's all the instruments I don't play.
And these books, I've never read one of them. So.
Right. So like having students learn from folks who have a different, a different approach to theory, just in the way they conceptualize some of the fundamentals too, is useful. And just like gonna say, the other thing is with YouTube music theory becoming kind of a big thing, a lot of professors are also starting to get their students, instead of writing an essay for a final, make a YouTube video, or make a video that's in the style of these kinds of explainer videos or something. Use this knowledge and this fluency that they have in videos and creating more interesting visual kinds of representations, sort of as an option for them to, going back to what Adam was saying about communication, we shouldn't rely on the 5-paragraph essay for everything, right? So having students gain that kind of literacy and to use YouTubers as models has been really useful.
Yeah, I do that as well. I get the students to do not necessarily YouTube, but a kind of a podcast, a video podcast, and an essay. What I find quite interesting is there's often quite a discrepancy in the quality of the grades the students get. You can get a student that really excels in this sort of YouTube format, and then the exact opposite. And I'm always really surprised, and it reinforces to me at least that is actually a really useful exercise, allowing students to find their optimum mode of presentation.
Yeah, it's like Adam was mentioning science communication earlier, and in much the same way, like music theory communication, what Adam and I do and what all like music theory YouTubers do, that's a separate skill. Like I am probably not as good a music theorist as any of the people on this call who have PhDs in music theory. But I have a lot of practice taking the stuff that I do know and like wrapping my head around it enough to sort of go and explain it to someone in a way that they can then understand it. And that's, again, it's just a separate skill, and people can be good at one and bad at the other.
I want to jump off of that. A big part of it is the story aspect of it, like what music theory communication is, like what's the lead. And I've worked with Estelle Caswell from Vox, the person who does a lot of the earworm videos. And a very interesting thing about it was how she was approaching each one of these explainer videos is what's the lead, LEDE. I think that's how they spell it, the journalist types. And that's very much what Cory and I do is like, what's the title? What's the thumbnail? Because we need to be able to draw people in to be able to hit them with the neo-Riemannian theory and like all the stuff. Like, what is the story being told here? And I know there's discussion of like, a recent video of mine, what key is Hey Joe in? And the thumbnail says it's an E. And then that combination of like, well, why is it an E? Like, it can't be that simple. Like, what's going on here? And that leads people in, it draws people in with that, the story that I'm trying to tell. And that's music communication. I would not even call myself a music theorist. I've actually talked a little bit with Cory about this. I feel like complete imposter when it comes to the rigorous academic study of music theory and the rigorous building an argument that way. But I definitely feel like I know what I'm doing with this music theory communication, which is a different skill that runs parallel, but it's not the same thing. And I feel like making that distinction is important for, I think that sort of thing is important. Yeah.
A lot of my videos.
Sorry.
Go ahead. I was just going to say, a lot of my videos, honestly, a little peek behind the curtains, are just me reading one paper and then just paraphrasing it and drawing elephants. Like that's my whole process.
Hey, but they're cool drawings. They're brilliant.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, look, you're both also, I mean, maybe you're being very modest, or you maybe don't even think of yourselves as big modest, but you are both, to my mind, certainly music theorists, and there's a lot of original research in what you're doing. Adam said you got this kind of, you feel like an imposter. You know, all academics have that, certainly. Well, I say that, but the only people who don't have imposter syndrome are the actual imposters. So you've got a good brownie point there for having imposter syndrome. So, you know, in a way, that's not quite true. I was going to ask, you know, what is the music theorist in the 21st century?
Jeez.
Just before anybody answers that, I've just been alerted by one of the elves that Philip Ewell in the chat has said, Adam, you're a music theorist, own it. Just thought.
Okay. Right. By the way, before anyone answers that question, you've got to think. I did promise Phil a shout out for his talk at it's 7 o'clock for us in the UK. It's immediately after this. There is a link. I think I've asked him to put a link in the YouTube chat as well on confronting music theory's anti-blackness, 3 case studies. So yeah, shout out for Phil, and own it, Adam, own it.
Okay, all right. And check out.
So what is a 21st century music theorist? Why are we so reluctant to call ourselves one?
I would say really
it
quickly.
Sounds fancy.
Yeah.
Sorry, Will. Go on.
Okay.
Oh yeah, no. I would say really quickly that the skill of this communication is, I think, an essential tool for the 21st century music theorists, whether you're talking about us, you know, teaching it, or our students. You know, I think in the training of musicians, or of, you know, whether people are studying music as their main degree or not, that's the ability to speak concisely, clearly, compellingly about music is, you know, a skill that has just become more and more important. Communicating digitally, communicating on, you know, in video, in sound, in dynamic forms of writing is just a hugely important thing. I don't have an answer for what the 21st century music theorist is necessarily, but it certainly includes this, as I think we've seen, especially accelerating in the past year or two.
Any other thoughts?
I feel like a broader definition of what music is definitely, and what music analysis is, and what even is music, significantly broader than what it has been. And that's part of my reluctance to call myself a music theorist, is because it's tied up in a lot of baggage. It's tied up in a lot of what music theory has been in the past. So that's kind of my thought, is like, it just needs to be bigger. It needs to be bigger, broader.
Plus, we all do different things as well. I mean, you know, Adam, your first line of your biography is you're a bassist. You know, lots of different identities. That's honestly
what I feel like. I just play bass, man. Like, I don't know why I'm
here. Folks, I'm a bit conscious that I've been given a lot of questions. Now, I hope our YouTube watchers don't think I've been ignoring them. I've actually tried to subtly weave them in sometimes without actually anybody noticing. But there are a few here that I'd like to address. One, I think we could maybe ask everybody individually, in what ways do you think your musicality, your own personal musicality, has changed from before you started delving into detailed music theory as opposed to after? So I guess, what's the kind of transformative effect on you as a musician in terms of music theory? Shall we go in reverse alphabetical order? John, no, Will, we start with you. The O counts for alphabetical order.
I mean, I guess that's a really good question. How does it affect musicality? I guess one of the things, and this is probably a side effect of being a theory teacher, is I've found, you know, not only does playing piano all the time make me a much better pianist than I ever was in my life, but also I feel like playing very music theoretical piano, being lots of student examples, lots of counterpoint and things, those things become embodied in a way that I never would have really expected from studying music theory. And it's not really until teaching it that it truly began to come together. But that when I'm doing counterpoint, or if I'm doing figures bass, my fingers almost don't want to do certain things anymore. They settle into the grooves of doing the right things, which I think is one, I suppose an ultimate goal of studying music theory intensively is to facilitate your music making. But I've always thought, studying theory is going to pay off in the way that Adam talks about in jazz improvisation, like internalizing lots of theory helps you to improvise fluidly. But I never quite expected until I started to notice it in myself that I knew my fingers no longer want to do certain things. I didn't expect the negative sort of thing. So I guess that's my insight on how it affects functionality.
Thanks, Will. I'm useless with alphabets when it goes backwards. I'm really embarrassing myself here. John, you're next.
It's Adam.
Oh, it's Adam.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, the embodied performance has been the big thing for me, especially in the past couple of years. It's become less of a thing that I think about. It's been less cerebral because I've lived with it. It just becomes something that I do and feel and breathe. And this is getting into the idea of like music theory is the craft of it all. And so I see all the time in comment sections like, oh, he is using music theory right now, or using music theory. I'm like, or you wrote that using music theory. And I'm like, okay, I can talk about the music that I'm making, but I feel like the more I learn and the more I unlearn, I embody it. And I think that's a very important person for any kind of musician. There's the 4 stages of knowing: unknown, unknowing, unknown, or let me try this again: unknown, unknowing, known, unknowing, known, knowing, and then unknown, knowing.
That's like me going through the alphabet backwards.
Yeah.
Sorry, I interrupted. Sorry.
Yeah. But like a personal hero of mine, Victor Wooten, talks about that. And I think it's originally from a Persian poet. I think also Donald Rumsfeld has used that analogy. But the more that you eventually want to unknow it. And I think a big part of analysis and a big part of understanding music is eventually forgetting it. And I think that's kind of an exciting process of knowing it and embodying it to the point where you can just be musical with it. And for me, that's been a big part of it, big part of the whole process.
Thanks. So now it must be John, is that right?
Yeah.
I have very little to add. It's the exact same thing. I mean, the further and further I went in to music theory as I kind of grew up, and then obviously eventually started teaching it, I just found that my fingers did all the work and I didn't really have to think about it. And especially for improvisation, I started out as a guitarist, but I play, once I started teaching, I ended up kind of transitioning to the piano and kind of almost consider that my main instrument now. And yeah, I just find that my hands sort of know what they're doing. I know what chord's going to sound good, and I can plan ahead, and all the fun stuff that goes along with knowing a little bit of music theory, dangerous though it may be.
A little music theory is a dangerous thing. That's Alexander Pope, isn't it? A little learning is a dangerous thing. So next, Julianne.
Yeah. I like that y'all brought up this idea, which I also get too, where it's sort of like, now that I sort of embodied so many music theory things, I can kind of have it come through my playing, when I do play instruments. I promise, sometimes I do. But also almost like on the other direction of this as well. Once I got into more higher than undergrad, especially, or like upper level undergrad music theory that gets beyond like chord labeling and those sort of fundamental building blocks, realizing that there's just so much we don't know and so much like to think about when we think about analysis and what the work of analysis is. And now I feel like my musicality, and when I play and when I sing and when I do listen, I'm already engaging in analysis. And to an extent, when I was younger and before I was learning music theory, I was doing a form of analysis anyway. And so it's really kind of opened my mind to what analysis can actually be, can look like, beyond our traditional approach of like, once you learn circle of fifths, you can then improvise them and it's great and that kind of thing. But sort of like, more of a feedback between the two.
Great, thanks, Julianne. Cory, you're next.
Yeah, I'm actually going to go the opposite direction of apparently everyone else in this call, because I don't really make music anymore. like I'll improvise on the piano like once every, like a couple times a month. I'll occasionally like do some MIDI stuff for fun, but it's all just sort of like recreational. And partly I think that's because like the stuff I got really into in music theory is not really stuff that's super relevant to the music that I like. It's just like, I'm really interested again in things like really like advanced neo-Riemannian theory. I keep referencing cube dance. It's because cube dance is beautiful, but like, I don't need cube dance for any of the music I would actually want to make. And so like I've gotten so much more into these like weird, abstract, esoteric theory ideas that don't really translate into anything I would want to do. And so I've sort of decided more focused on that. And like, I really like, I'm a singer. I have a degree in vocal performance. I don't think I've warmed up in like 3 years. I'm just like, yeah.
Wow. I mean, I wonder if I'm a bit different. I know you're saying you're different there, Cory. I think I might be too. In that when I mean, as a music theorist, I almost think of it as almost a separate thing from my performance in a way. That the kind of thing I'm obsessed with as a music theorist is harmony, really. Kind of more of the sort of Scriabin, mystical type stuff. And yeah, I'll play all of that, but on the piano, I tend to play sort of Mozart, Beethoven, Schubert, and it seems almost quite divorced from it. The kind of analysis and theory that I employ when I'm playing the piano myself, which I'm brilliant, but only in my own living room. As soon as anybody listens, that's it, I fall to pieces, and which is why you'll never hear me play in public. But the thing I think that's changed over the last 20 years of my life when I've really got into music theory is the love of sitting with a musical score and studying the hell out of it, and actually not actually performing it, like just like hearing it all in my head, but the act of really trying to squeeze it and think about it in different ways using music theory. I find that really quite performative and really enjoyable activity, and I think that's something that I really benefit from in terms of music theory.
Yeah, I mean, I think I got into music in the first place as a form of artistic expression, and these days I think sort of my videos and my analysis, that's my art. And so I don't really need to be, and I still again, I play piano sometimes. Like I'm not completely out of it, but like it really hasn't been a focus for me in a long time.
I guess the disingenuous thing for me about when I'm teaching music theory is I'm teaching students how useful this is and how they can use it in different ways, and trying to unlock different possibilities for them and show them how much richer it can make them as musicians, when really I'm thinking, learn this music theory because it's wonderful. I don't know why I'm constantly making excuses for that, but there we go. Folks, I do have a couple more questions here from our YouTube visitors, one of which is from Nicole Grimes. She asks, could speakers address the role of textbooks, and perhaps the textbook industry as it relates to music analysis in the undergraduate classroom and online as well, on both sides of the Atlantic? Textbooks.
I only reference textbooks because I don't know. It's kind of what I have.
Joke.
I don't really. Yeah. As a joke, I don't use them. I don't know that this is.
You take them off the shelf.
Yeah, because it's a fun bit, I guess. But I feel like I don't have much to add on that because I don't use them. I don't feel that they're very useful for me. But
yeah, on textbooks, if you see right now, my mic is just sitting on my old French textbook. At the bottom of the stack is my old theory textbook, and for the most part, I just use it as a mouse pad. Yep. And it's like, it was good enough for the class. It got me through the class, and I read ahead. It was, I think, part of what got me interested in theory was some of the stuff in there. But like, I have never found a theory textbook that I really liked, because I feel like a lot of them almost have this like academic inferiority complex to them, where they have to sound really complicated in order to convince people that they're a real field of study. And so like, it feels like there's so much of it that just could be said so much simpler, but they need you to know that they're smart enough to say it in the complicated way. And that's not to say that every textbook is. That's just the ones that I've looked at.
It's not something I've ever really come across, to be honest, at any stage of my education. We didn't have textbooks when I was in high school, nor at university. Yes, we had scores and maybe handouts, and we'd be recommended books, but this concept of, the closest thing I can think to that is maybe the ABRSM grade 5 syllabus or something, which I may have glanced at, but like, I mean, I don't know, not really something I've ever come across, to be honest, or well used in any consistent way.
Yeah, you also had a former life though, John, as a music teacher in a secondary education setting. So that's what's
and I mean, it was
11
the
to
same
18
there.
students.
We didn't have textbooks in that sense. We went through content in lots of different ways. I like to think in engaging ways, but there wasn't a here's the book, that's the course, see you later. There was none of that.
I will say there is one textbook that I do endorse, but it proposes such a radically different approach to all theory, and that's W.A. Matthews' Harmonic Experience, which is a fantastic book, and it's very interesting, and I love it to death, and I personally work out of it, but that's the only textbook that I like.
I mean, does Tagg's Everyday Tonality count as a textbook? I wasn't sure, because I was thinking that's a book that I actually do. Again, I think that it gets a little more complicated than it needs to at times still, and gets into some weeds that it could really have skipped. But by and large, I do think it's a really interesting book, and I do recommend reading it. And I'm not sure if it's a textbook, but
I mean, I guess, sorry, I was going to say, I guess one of the aspects of textbook is it's got that kind of curriculum structure, which you kind of have to accept and work through, which, I mean, I guess is one of the differences between music theory in any institution, education institution, where you are setting a full curriculum. That has, advantages, there's, you do learn a lot sort of more over a longer time, but then there's disadvantages. You're learning this kind of big hierarchical structure. So some of it might be relevant to you, but quite a lot of it might not be. And I guess that is a sort of fundamentally different, I guess, economy from the YouTube economy, which is, I'm interested in this, I'm going to go for that. A person is really building their own curriculum. Is that fair?
Well, I don't know. I think you could sort of view it as analogous to building a curriculum, but I think there's a significant difference in that it's not built on itself. Yeah. For the most part, every 12-tone video could stand on its own. And if it can't, I will take the time to re-explain the important parts from the video that I needed you to watch before, because I don't trust that people will go watch it. And so if I don't take that time, and so it's hard to think of it for me as a curriculum in a sense, because it's just a series of individual things that you can watch in a row if you want, but they're not in any particular order. I remember early on, one of my videos got posted to the r/music theory subreddit. And most of the people were oh, this is cool. But there was just one dude who was just really mad that I was talking about fort numbers. And it was this isn't important. It's I didn't talk about it because it was important. I talked about it because I thought it was cool.
Yeah. Will, I think you were going to say something and then I kind of half interrupted.
Oh, yeah, no, I was just going to say that from one standpoint, textbooks are interesting because they do offer a certain index of where the field is going. They're a very lagging indicator, but you can look at textbooks and see that, textbook authors in their new editions are attempting to, incorporate more diverse musical voices and are attempting to incorporate new topics that people tend to talk about. They do expand. So they're interesting from that standpoint, watching the field grow as a tangible kind of a thing. But I mean, that said, my institution stopped using a core theory textbook a year or two ago because they just don't offer, they're useful for curricular organization and they're great for reference, but they generally don't offer a good value in terms of the cost to the student versus the amount of it that you are going to use. We're not using nearly enough of a 900-page music theory textbook to justify making students spend so much money on it. And, I often as a lecturer want to explain it in my own terms, even if I'm guided by the order of topics that the textbook uses. I want to help my students cut right to the core thing, a bit like Cory was talking about. Everything has to be wrapped in many concepts and many examples, but there are a lot of interesting books coming out that move beyond that. Kevin Holm Hudson's book and Jennifer Snodgrass's Contemporary Musicianship, but nothing that's quite as enough of a multi-tool Swiss Army knife that an actual theory class I think would benefit from.
Yeah, Julianne, I wondered if you had any thoughts about that. Well,
actually, Bill said pretty much everything that I was going to say. Mostly, and the cost to the students, often over $100 per textbook is just. egregious. So that's my comment.
Yeah. Textbooks, academic publishing generally, the cost.
Yeah. I think back to my arranging class, it was like $150 for the textbook. I opened it once because I needed to look up the list of appropriate viola double stops because we were writing for a string quintet. And that's the only time I used that book.
Probably bought a cheap viola and figured that out yourself.
Probably. Or I could have Googled it. Like, I'm sure it's online.
I didn't really settle on being a music theorist until maybe my senior year of undergrad. So after I finished the sophomore theory sequence, I sold my books back. I was like, all right, done with that.
Yep.
And a year or two later, turned around and went to grad school.
So I've got a couple more questions here from our guest on YouTube. One here is a big one. Do you think, this is for everybody, do you think music theory should be a required subject in general education? I guess this means if you're doing music in any kind of institution, an educational institution.
Yeah, it's in for a music degree.
Yeah, music. Let's say music degree, but I mean it could be a college before then. But yeah, what do people think? Big topic.
I mean, if it is said like music, like do we mean like if music and the study of it in some capacity should be?
Let's just say. Yeah, let's just say a music degree. It doesn't say in the question, but let's just say a music degree. If one's studying it,
should it be compulsory?
Should it be compulsory?
Yes, and that's my final word.
That's solved then, solved. Any other thoughts?
Sure.
Yes, but not the way it's currently taught.
Yeah, I don't have much.
I think, again, coming back to like the Roman numeral analysis thing, is like if what you walk away from a theory class with is that like D is the 5 chord in G major, then you really haven't taken a theory class. And so I think there's a lot of value to understanding theory. And I think that most musicians would benefit from understanding some form of music theory, but I don't think that looks a lot like what we're teaching, or at least I can't speak to all undergrad programs. I can only speak to the one I took, but I learned figured bass in that, and it was a rock-oriented school, and they still decided we needed to learn figured bass just in case we were ever, doing that. So, yeah, I would say yes, but with significant revisions to how we do it.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think that the sort of standard music theory class of like learning particular ways of labeling things based on theories that are based on a very small repertoire of art music, that should all be just elective. But I think that the idea of music theory as thinking about music in some way should be something that's required. Yeah. So some sort of like in-depth kind of, and learning how to communicate about music is often in the purview of music theory. So, it's a question of changing what music theory is. A lot of institutions in the US are doing this kind of thing with making, that kind of classical Western art music stuff, the electives, and having your core classes actually be a little broader and a little bit about developing a broader skill set that is still called music theory.
If I can just jump in there really quickly about, and Kenneth, you can sort of maybe jump in whenever it's necessary, but like, I think that at Liverpool, that's something which we kind of do reasonably well here. I mean, particularly a couple of years ago, well, I say a couple of years, it could have been a decade ago, one of our colleagues, Fred Jarman, started a module called Music as Sound. And the idea behind this was to just completely strip away, your terminology and all of that kind of stuff, and just take a step back and actually appreciate this phenomenon, listen to music, talk about the different ways, either terminologically or otherwise, that we could, we can talk about this phenomenon. And also at Liverpool, if I don't know, this is where you'll need to help me, Kenneth. I don't know if we're the only institution now, but we were certainly the first to admit music undergraduates who didn't have a formal qualification in music. Am I right in saying that?
Well, we I don't know if we're the only one now, but we still don't necessarily. We do for music degrees, which is weird because it's always called, because of the way it is, it's always called music when it means kind of classical, Western music and popular music. I mean, it's ridiculous terminology, but it's just a marketing thing which nobody can really change. But you're right, John. One of the things I used to be impressed with Dr. Fred Jarman's module and it's called Music as Sound, was that when they then came, students as an option could come to me then in the second semester and learn the music theory, you know, as I would be teaching it. They really did have a much kind of richer, much more inventive sense for, you know, breaking the rules of music theory, inventing their own different types of diagrams, inventing their own novel interfaces. And I really, really valued them, that experience that they'd gone through of kind of forgetting everything that they thought they knew about music theory. And then, you know, building up, their critical apparatus was much more, I guess, in tune. So I really do like that. I mean, for myself, I do wrestle with this question about whether students should have music theory as part of a music degree. As a music theorist, yeah, of course, I want students to, but there are so many different aspects of musical endeavor which don't necessarily need music theory. My ideal degree would be one in which students could choose a path through it if they didn't want to do music theory. You know, they wanted to focus maybe on the social, critical, cultural aspects, all sorts of other things, music psychology. They had that route. There's just this issue of, well, if they do that, are they disenfranchising themselves from this other world which theory can unlock for you? Is it my place to tell them they can't? The answer, I think, for me is no.
I love the idea of not the Western art music being the elective, and then but the idea of thinking critically about music and all of its forms, music as sound. I love that. You know, the idea of requiring dance for all music majors seems ridiculous for us, but of course we're coming from a Western perspective. And honestly, the more I think about it, the more I'm thinking like, yeah, if you learned how to dance a jig and if you learned how to dance a sarabande, you'd have a much deeper understanding of Bach than if you didn't. And that sounds like a ridiculous thing, and yet I know a lot of people who have gone out and done that. It's like, yeah, you really get Bach a lot more if you're dancing along to, like, the cello suites, for example. That concept is just very foreign for us. And yet it shouldn't be, because in cultures around the world, dance and music are so intertwined as to be not be able to disambiguate between the two of them. And then you can do analysis of dance too, and then that becomes a big part of it. It's just that expanding what it means to think critically about music and thinking what music analysis is, I think is pretty sorely needed on all fronts. And I think it's happening, which is very exciting. So yeah, I think theory should be required, but I think a larger definition of what theory is also required.
Anyone else got thoughts? No? Right, there's another question here. How do you think, I'm trying to work my head around this, the way this question is phrased. How do you think that the lick or music used in memes has influenced the way that... What?
Adam.
Go ahead.
Thoughts.
And by the way, there was some confusion. My wife turned the lights on. She's watching. She must think it's too dark in here, which it is. But when I turn the light on, it looks like I'm in a kind of weird red light district. So I've turned it off again.
It's an artistic.
I don't want to bring the SMA into disrepute. So yes, anyway, the question I've got here is, how much do you think that the lick or music used in memes has influenced the way that theory is taught and consumed? Has it made music theory more accessible? That's a question from Ruel Dillon.
I assume that means online, right? I mean, the academics here can correct me. I assume y'all aren't like referencing All-Star very often, but
yeah. Well, I mean, the whole thing, like I started using it as interstitial music in a lot of my videos, and then it was a joke. It was a joke originally started in a Facebook group that shared instances of jazz musicians sharing the lick. Then, oh gosh, I'm going to forget, the guy who teaches at University of Nevada in Reno, Alex Heitliger, he created a compilation of the lick of just all these jazz musicians playing it. Then I started referencing it. Anyway, it's been the self-referential culture online over and over and over again. And I think the big thing with the lick is that it's a short diatonic melody that anybody can immediately recognize. And because you have this short diatonic melody, you can demonstrate many different concepts with this thing. It's a joke, it's a shibboleth, it's a means of distinguishing in-group versus out-group, which is absolutely essential for memes. For memes, you need to memes need to be remixed. You need to constantly be remixing a meme and putting it in different places. Like, you'll find this with visual memes all the time, and the lick is a perfect musical meme. I mean, there's the Dies Irae was the lick before the lick. composers putting the dies irae in everything. It's a short diatonic melody that can be remixed in many different ways. So I think it's just another, I don't know, it's people like young, it haunts me, but it's such a useful tool.
I don't know if you've seen, Adam, but like, I don't know how recent this was, but I watched a video yesterday where someone has transcribed every single time that you have used it and in all the various ways in which you've reharmonized. I don't know if that's an old video or not, but
I saw that. They somehow managed to figure out which temperaments I used, because sometimes I was using 17.
Yeah, I noticed that.
19 tone. They didn't get one of them. They were like, I don't know what temperament this is. And if they're watching this, it was in 22 tone equal temperaments. Just anyway, but yeah, they transcribed every version of it, which is fun. Anyway,
any other thoughts? No.
Go on. Or on like meme music in general, like beyond the like things like All Star, Never Gonna Give You Up, those sorts of things. Like there's a lot of, to come back to sort of the communication side of things, a lot of that is about hooks, right? It's about finding a way to say like, this is a thing you care about, and doing that as quickly as you possibly can. And so like that can involve like sort of like, here's a utilitarian use for this or whatever, but it can also be like, here's a thing with All Star. And now you can listen to like, oh, that's All Star. This is fun. How did you do it? And it actually came up in a video recently where like I found that All Star was like a specifically really good example of a thing that I was talking about.
The Plagal
Cascade, yeah. It's sort of, and just like built up like in the middle of the video, just built up and then just had like dropped All Star. And I got so many people being like, that was amazing. Like that was so helpful and understand. It's just like, because they already know the thing, it's very easy to then build ideas on top of it instead of coming at them with music they may not recognize or music that you wrote yourself.
Exactly. Yeah. It's a short, immediate shorthand, immediate cultural shorthand that is immensely useful for communicating ideas quickly.
Yeah, and not to minimize the role of humor generally too in all of this too, as a kind of way of almost like lowering the stakes of learning something that has been traditionally considered scary. The math of music is music theory. That's a stereotype that goes around, and kind of creating like a lighthearted sort of meeting ground with these kinds of cultural tropes. And for sure.
It unstuffy.
Yes.
It also creates an atmosphere of, frankly, just fun and playing around, which I think is what music theory hasn't tended to do in the past. This kind of experimentation with it. It's kind of something that you were supposed to adopt, use, not even adapt or improve on, just accept. Whereas now I think what we all want to try and do is show just how versatile this is and how much it's our gift to play with it.
That's a great way of putting it. It's our gift. Play with it.
Well, it was instantaneous, just but I think it is true.
Speaking rights reserved, copyright Kenneth Smith.
Don't bother. Right, okay. There's a question here about terminology. How do we deal with the problems of terminology? Terminology it's crazy in our discipline. It's esoteric. It's contradictory. Don't even get Philip Tagg started on it. It's unsystematic. It's a huge barrier, but we kind of need it. That's the trouble. So how can we deal with the issue of accessibility in music theory and its highly technical language, which can seem like a real barrier? Have people got thoughts on this?
I don't know if this like answers if this is kind of like sidestepping that question slightly, but I think it's obviously there's a terminological issue. And again, I am, big Philip Tagg fan, and I know that lots of other people have kind of followed, looked at his stuff. But I think the bigger issue is just knowing when it's appropriate to use what terms. And, this is something that's come up, in your videos, and I'm sure other people have talked about this as well, when to describe something as being moderato versus fast, or when is something a riff versus an ostinato, and so on. It was something which I found very, very strange whenever I was in school teaching, kind of 15-year-olds and describing, Queen, for example, Queen's Killer Queen as moderato, and I was just like, this is so weird. And it's just kind of, I suppose, maybe that's just something we have to be conscious of when it's appropriate to use what terms, and making sure that we're in the right lane at all times. Doesn't really answer it, but that's just my 2 cents.
I mean, I've definitely in my work really sort of built my own terminological vocabulary, which does not include phrases like terminological vocabulary. But like I'm very much looking at things and trying to find like what are the terms that like we all know and we all use really, really commonly and we could like throw around, but that like an average person or an average musician might not. Like one of my big, like the hill I will die on is that tonic is just not a useful term. And I know that this is a thing like Philip Tagg talks about, which tries to whatever that word is, but sort of make it more rigorous and sort of do like tonical versus atonical. And just, but like, I think there's an etymological history you can trace from the concept of tones to the word tonic that makes sense if you understand it. But there is no intuitive attachment to that word to people who don't, like when I hear tonic before I became a musician, I thought soda, right? And so I have no idea why the one chord is the soda chord. That doesn't make any sense. Whereas if you call it the root, that I think is people, again, and people will like get mad at me sometimes because like the root is what you use for chords, not scales. But like root is a concept that means something. Root is like, you know what a root is. Things grow out of roots. Things are based on roots. This is a term that people can connect with in a way that I think is much more intuitive. And similarly, like I don't use the word scale degree anymore. Like everyone in this call and probably everyone watching on YouTube knows exactly what I mean when I say scale degree. But like a while ago, like I used to do this thing with a friend of mine where we would review each other's scripts, and she wasn't a music theorist or a musician. She was a physicist. And she was looking at this as like, I don't know what a scale degree is. And so now I just say like the sixth note of the scale. And that's much more accessible. And it's the same idea and you can get it across in roughly the same amount of time, but you're not putting up this barrier. And so I try to do that as much. Sometimes I'll use technical terms if I have to, but like, I'm always thinking like, does this term need to be here? And if so, how can I explain the meaning? Because I have to define it if I use it.
That's interesting. I'd love to talk to you at some point about like coming up with some shared, like referencing the sixth degree of the scale and some very specific things from YouTube videos. I always try and relate it to a sound. Like at any time I try and play a concept that might have some jargon and always say, this is this sound. This is how I guess I'm perceiving this sound. And as like a way of drawing people in. So it's less about the jargon and more about that experience. Now, there's jargon's necessary because we want to try and put a word to a feeling or a word to a concept. But, there's the constant, if there are 13 different words or 13 different standards and you're like, we should like create we should create a new standard and it just creates a 14th standard. I'm horribly messing up this comment, or cartoon. But yeah, there's certain things that are just unavoidable, but it's music. We should hear it. So that's the thing I always think about.
Yeah. And I often think also music in itself is so inherently complex. The fact that the terminology is a little bit complex too is kind of natural. I would love it to be sort of standardized and make more rational sense, but there is a sense in which I can't really avoid. It is quite liberating if you're sort of writing an article for a very sort of specific academic music journal when you can just, use real shorthands for things. But when I actually have to communicate to students, and certainly if I was trying to the broader public, it really is interesting as an experiment because it really forces you to think, now, what do I actually mean by this? And there's always a simpler way of, not even simpler, it's not about simple, but a more direct, meaningful way of saying what you're trying to say. Yeah, clearer. A clearer way of saying what you're trying to say.
Yeah, hemi, demi, semi-quaver.
Yeah.
You UK folks, what is that?
There our terminology differs. I thought it was a squemi, demi, hemi, semi-quaver.
Can I just ask a question? Actually, I just want to pick up on something that Cory said a second ago, and I suppose this is kind of applies to the YouTubers in the room, to be honest. But you said about, the hill that you would die on is the whole, like the root thing and, changing that sort of terminology. Is that something that is, kind of personal to you? Is that sort of a personal philosophy, or is that influenced by, you know, your role as this YouTuber? And I suppose more broadly, do you have any of those distinctions in either of your lives? As in, is there, you know, things that you will say amongst yourselves, but you will maybe change on YouTube, if that makes any sense? You know, like, is the root thing basically born out of a personal philosophy, or is it this is going to make more sense in the content?
It's born out of a personal confusion, right? Like, again, like these days, I am not at all confused when I hear someone say the tonic. Like that's no longer an issue for me. But there was a time where it's just like, I was looking at this, it's like, what does this mean? And because it doesn't have this intuitive attachment, like even beyond music, I've always been big on like clear and effective communication. And like I spend a lot of time thinking about like when I'm writing anything, I think a lot about like how I'm phrasing things, what I'm saying. And so that I think it's sort of a natural extension of that then, and maybe the fact that I do think about that stuff a lot is part of why I'm good at my job. But I don't think that it's necessarily like a thing where like if we were just like talking privately, if it was just like you and me talking about theory, I would probably still call it the root at this point. Like it's so ingrained in the way that I talk about things. And there's certainly like, you know, if you were to use some complicated terminology, like tonic isn't, but you know, if you were to like talk about like neo-Riemannian transformations, I wouldn't have to be like, whoa, hold up, and ask you to like rewind and explain that because I know what that means. But I try not to do that stuff, partly again because that's my job, communicating to people who don't have the background that I have, but also just I think it's better to use language that more people can follow.
The power of metaphor really like is tied into that. When you're saying root, you know, that's a metaphor that any English speaker would be able to connect with what they're experiencing musically, or at least assuming that they're encultured to Western music. I think the more reliance on metaphor would be fantastic, and finding other examples of jargon that can be metaphorical, because, you know, the way we experience so much terminology in music is sound is metaphorical anyway, soft and loud, you know, why, you know, there's so basically every term that we use to describe music anyway is metaphorical. There's no specific word in the English language which is unique to sound. Everything also might relate to touch or whatever, or, you know, like a loud tie, it's bright tie or whatever. So I think metaphor is a great way forward if there's a desire to de-jargonify for communication. If I'm gonna use that word.
I like the term de-jargonify. That's wonderful. That's another one to copyright, John. If you can make a list of copyrighted neologisms for the day. Folks, we've got about 20 minutes left, maybe a little bit less. I just wanted to really ask the final question, which is a big one, really. It is very individual and will be very personal to each of you. What do you see as being the future of music theory, or rather, what's your utopian dream for the future of music theory? Should we do the alphabet thing, or should we go in terms of the, I don't know.
I mean, as the one first in the alphabet, I vote reverse alphabet.
Right, okay.
I was going to say the same. I was going to say the reverse. As the last, I vote yes. First.
Right, we'll go right in the middle. John Moore. Sorry, John.
Zigzag out.
I mean, I would imagine what I'm probably going to say is probably going to be echoed by a lot of you. I mean, just the sort of turmoil that music theory has gone through, well, I was going to say has not gone through in the last year, but has rather been made public in the last year. I think all of us should be given, all of us working in this discipline, be it in, you know, universities or online or wherever it might be, you know, we should be given pause by what has sort of come to light, and should make us kind of consider our own positions very much and use our platforms in whatever way, whatever they may be. Yeah, I mean, I suppose my vision for the future is just trying to bring in the voices that haven't been there for far too long. And yeah, that's it.
Well, look, that was quite inspiring. We really should have put you last. Never mind. Yeah, Will, you had your hand up there.
Yeah, well, I think the little thing I was going to say follows exactly from what John said, that actually tying back to the beginning where you were talking about the different terminologies of theory and analysis. I think if you take that seriously, that I don't know about the future utopia of music theory, but I think the near future actually is really to look into, take analysis seriously. I think that if all of us, on this call, and I'm sure many watching, have the goal of increasing the reach of music theory and, sort of opening it up to more styles of music, I think that we have to really embrace the idea of spending a lot of time with individual pieces of music of all different styles, and sort of, enjoying what you were saying, Kenneth, about just throwing yourself into a score for hours and just diving in and seeing what's there. That I actually, in some ways, the analysis theory distinction is really useful here, that I think theory has to come out of analysis. And I think that for the moment, or for the near future, one of the best things that music theorists can do is to do tons of analysis and to bring lots of music in and to really kind of build it up and see what we can learn from it. And that's, to me, one of the ways that the field of music theory can move forward, is to look at tons of different music and really build out of that, of all the different examples that you may not have known before, that we may not have considered properly the domain of music theory, but to let it be fed out of new analyses, new explorations, new styles.
Yeah, and on that note, I guess just completely blow up the alphabet thing, but I think my vision to sort of springboard off that is just engaging with more kinds of music on their own terms, because I think that that's a really big thing in like a lot of the way that music theory has been historically done, is we've sort of built these models and then we've gone out and tried to apply them to everything we possibly can. And like, if you look at what Ed Sheeran is doing, Ed Sheeran is not making music that can be understood through the same lens as Bach. He's just not. And so like, if you want to sort of engage with other styles of music, it can't just be like bringing in those and then trying to do your Schenker graphs to them. It has to start from like, what is the language of this music? And that's something I've tried to do. I've tried to do that with like chord loops, especially, as a fascination of mine, but like trying to think about them more from their own principles instead of from these abstract, like old school things that worked for, counterpoint in the 18th century.
Julianne, I think it's, I'm going to turn my light on. I'm sorry about this, sitting in the dark. I realize I look pink now, but never mind. Sorry about this.
Yeah, I just echo everybody. If we're going to do analysis on other kinds of music, new kinds of music, if we're going to bring in music and analyze it on its own terms, which is so important to do, then we need to be bringing in other voices and not just saying, hey, you person who doesn't normally do music theory, come on and learn how to do figured bass. And then from there, you'll be prepared to do your own thing, which is sort of how we do it now in terms of inclusivity. It's like, oh, make everybody take these required courses, but rather to consider very seriously other modes of analysis, other modes of music. I mean, considering the metaphors and dance and that kind of aspect, which will inherently create a more inclusive environment because you're not gatekeeping certain types of musical knowledge and saying certain musical knowledge is not actually knowledge, and other, so the subjective versus objective false dichotomy thing. And also that music theorists can like have jobs and be employed, and that we can be supported by our institutions, like in a very realistic kind of way. Like it's, the humanities funding is always going away. There's always a crisis, and we should be inspired by what the YouTubers are doing, which is to foster this inherent interest in music and thinking about music and music theory and making and practicing. And that's bringing students into our institutions to learn more. And we should be kind of responsible for more kind of collaborations and not just kind of I don't know what we've been doing so far. But yeah, that's my final thing.
Good, thanks, Julian. Adam, you should be next. It's just that then I would have to go last, and I'm the chair. And it kind of, if the chair goes last, it kind of looks as though he or she is having like the last word, and that's the last thing I want to do. So I guess my vision is really just that that the injection of energy that people in this room have helped, certainly played a major role in getting this into much wider consciousness, is able to be absorbed, not in academia for academia's sake, but so that people who undertake our courses can bring that into us and help rejuvenate the whole discipline, and see it as a very kind of malleable thing, which I think is something which I think is certainly alive on the YouTube community. But I think a lot of, certainly in the UK, a lot of students that we get coming think of theory as this fixed thing. It's like it's right or it's wrong, and I kind of want that to be. I want us to be much more open, and I would hope that many of the aspects of the diversity and different voices speaking of this will hopefully come through with that as well, as part of this widening of the whole discipline. That's my view. I just did that there because I didn't want to come last. So Adam, I'm sorry I put you on last now.
Well, I'm just going to echo basically what everybody else has said. Cory's idea of coming at music from its own terms and not from the lineage of European music from the 18th century, because it's always viewed, pretty much every style of music is always viewed through that lens, and that doesn't do a service for that style of music, 18th and 19th century European music, which is wonderful, and everybody deserves to experience that on its own terms because it's a very beautiful style of music, but it shouldn't be the default for everything. I think that having a much more inclusive view of what music is absolutely essential for music theory. Dance might be a little bit of a stretch, but at the same time, I don't know, like I'm here for it. Ideas of tuning and intonation and how that has affected music in a very deep way across cultures across the world isn't talked about that much in the West, and it isn't talked about that much in music theory, about how intonation and tuning deeply affects melodies and harmony too, potentially. Think like ideas of coming at music from the people who make it and how they think about the music rather than how we think about the music. That's a big thing that I am learning much more about. I would love to have more people who play different styles of music that I understand come on my YouTube channel and talk about how they're thinking about what they're doing. And they come up with that from the very bottom of like coming up with their, everything is a music theory, if you're thinking about it critically and thoughtfully. And that's, I think, my utopia is how a musician and how a people think about the music. It should be what the music theory is for that, and at least the basis for that. And that's that's my thought.
Great. Well, thank you, Adam, and thanks to all of our speakers, to Will, Julianne, 12 Tone, Cory, Adam, and John. Thanks for all of you for giving up so much of your time to share your thoughts with us. Thanks also, I must say, to the Society of Music Analysis, who've funded this event, although it wasn't very expensive because of the online situation, and also the University of Liverpool, who have kind of hosted it, except, well, I guess we're using their passwords and things for the.
We'll give them credit.
Hosted is
thanks,
a loose term, but yes, thanks to Liverpool, and thank you to you all. So now there's a little bit of time. If people do want to head over to Professor Philippe's talk over on the link, which I think should be in the chat on YouTube. But other than that, let's all say farewell to our guests, and we do hope to see you again in the future. Thank you all.